Tonight at 10, the latest COVID rules for people arriving in the UK are heavily criticised by the travel industry. From early on Tuesday, passengers will have to show proof of a negative PCR or lateral flow test taken no earlier than 48 hours before departing for the UK.
This constant chopping and changing, it just makes it really, really difficult for travel to be an attractive proposition. People decide to spend their money elsewhere.
We'll have more reaction to the new rules and the latest on the new variant of coronavirus. Also tonight, a vigil in memory of 6-year-old Arthur Hughes, who was tortured and killed by his stepmother and father. The Pope visits a Greek island and denounces those who use migrants for political propaganda. Thousands of homes are still without power for a second weekend in the wake of Storm Arwen.
As he comes home to win the first Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
And Lewis Hamilton wins one of the most dramatic Formula One races in years. Good evening. The latest changes for travellers arriving in the UK have been heavily criticised by the travel industry, who warn that firms will be devastated. Under the changes, passengers will be required to show proof of a negative PCR or lateral flow test taken no earlier than 48 hours before departing for the UK. And the changes come into effect at 4 o'clock on Tuesday morning. Downing Street says the measures are necessary because of the rise in cases of the new variant of coronavirus. Now, the latest country to be added to the travel red list is Nigeria. And from tomorrow, travellers to the UK from Nigeria will have to quarantine in a hotel for 10 days. Our business correspondent Katie Prescott has more details.
Happy memories of holidays gone by. Dennis and his partner were looking forward to many more smiling pictures. But because of the changes to travel rules, he's thinking of cancelling their upcoming trip to Tenerife.
When they announced that we'd have to have a PCR test on the way back and wait, let's say 2 days, I sort of thought, OK, that's manageable. But now they want you to do another one 48 hours before you return from holiday. And it's just the extra cost. And to be honest with you, a lot of it is the uncertainty as well. Do you go on holiday and something changes dramatically again?
And it's those sorts of concerns that are worrying the travel industry.
We believe that this will be a significant setback for demand this winter, real impacts on Christmas. I think we'll see people now cancelling or postponing travel plans. And for a sector that hasn't had any revenue for 18 months, give or take a few months over the summer period, it's really significant indeed. Airlines do not make money in the winter, and so we've got a really difficult stretch ahead of us now.
At London's Heathrow Airport this morning, travellers were pragmatic about the new testing requirements.
Yeah, that obviously definitely adds some inconvenience to my journey, but I totally understand it.
I used to do that anyway, just to come back to be safe. So I think it's a good way to go about it. If it means we avoid a lockdown, definitely worth doing a test. Literally, no skin off anyone's back to just get tested.
Maybe if we were a bigger family, it would have been more of a concern. But right now, it's more of like a cost versus safety thing.
Many of the people travelling from London St Pancras to Europe today will have to take a test when they come home. The big question, though, is how much these changes will stop people travelling, especially over the Christmas period, a time, of course, when people do tend to move around to see their friends and family, because perhaps of the uncertainty involved and the cost. The Deputy Prime Minister says it's better to be safe than sorry.
I think, though, that the worst thing would be to then lurch, having not taken incremental steps that can make a difference, even if it's only at the margins. I think we want to make sure we take those steps earlier, precisely to avoid the bigger disruption to travel and the economy.
As always, these decisions tread a fine line between protecting the economy and protecting public health. The new testing requirements and the red list will be reviewed in 3 weeks' time on the 20th of December. Katie Prescott, BBC News.
And the UK Health Security Agency has confirmed 86 additional cases of the Omicron variant of coronavirus, bringing the total in the UK to 246. Our health correspondent, Catherine Da Costa, reports on the spread of the variant here and worldwide.
Scientists around the world are working quickly to gather evidence about the new Omicron variant. Is it more infectious? Can it dodge immunity? Does it cause more serious illness? The first pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together. Early data from South Africa, where Omicron's now dominant, suggests it's spreading more rapidly than previous waves, and it's more likely to reinfect people who've already had COVID. Scientists say most cases have been mild so far, and there may be early signs vaccines are keeping people out of hospital.
A large proportion of people that have been admitted have not been vaccinated. So it's the same story as what we have known before from vaccines, it seems. And the story is that vaccines protect against severe disease and death, and therefore vaccines are still absolutely critical.
So far, small numbers of the Omicron variant have been confirmed in around 40 countries. In the UK, there are just under 250 confirmed cases, but not all are linked to travel, which suggests it might be starting to spread in communities. To get ahead of a potential new wave of infections, the government's made it a national mission to offer boosters to all adults in order to maximise our protection.
About half of British labs are able to detect suspected Omicron cases from PCR tests. They then need to be sent off for genomic sequencing to know for sure. The UK sequences about 20% of positive cases, so Omicron could be spreading more quickly than we think.
The Omicron variant is highly transmissible. It appears to be spreading very rapidly in South Africa, and the early signs are that it's spreading pretty rapidly in the UK too. If those trends continue, then over the course of the coming weeks and months, Omicron could even come to replace Delta entirely right around the world.
Scientists think we'll know within days how well antibodies are able to control or neutralise Omicron in the lab. That's our first line of defence against infection. But it may take several weeks before we have a clear picture of just how effective vaccines and treatments are at preventing severe disease and how much of a threat Omicron may pose to health services around the world. Catherine Da Costa, BBC News.
So let's take a look at the latest official figures on the pandemic in the UK. They show there were 43,992 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, 46,006 cases were reported per day in the past week. There were 54 deaths, that's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, which means that the average number of deaths over the past 7 days was 119. And more than 20 million people have now received their booster jab. Let's turn to some of the day's other main stories. A major review has been announced of the way that various agencies handled the case of Arthur Hughes, the 6-year-old who was tortured and killed by his stepmother and father 2 months after social workers had found no safeguarding concerns in the home. The review will consider how best to protect children who find themselves under threat in the future. Earlier today, hundreds of people took part in a vigil outside Arthur's home in Solihull, as our correspondent Sarah Campbell reports now.
The house in which Arthur spent the final tortured months of his life. Close by, family and friends gathered together to remember the little boy who was made to feel that no one loved him.
Arthur, are you going to play for England?
In life, he loved school, football and superheroes. The cruelty and pain inflicted on him is almost impossible to comprehend. He was killed by his stepmother, Emma Tustin, and father, Thomas Hughes. They were jailed for 29 and 21 years, respectively. The Attorney General is looking into whether their sentences are too lenient. But were others in a position to protect him, and were warning signs missed?
Arthur raised concern. He was not a baby. He was 6 years old. He raised concern and the system did not hear him. We must listen to the voices of children.
Announced today by the Department for Education, an urgent inspection into social care, health, police and probation services in Solihull, where Arthur lived and died, and a national child safeguarding practice review into lessons to be learned to ensure best practice across England and to try and prevent another case such as this.
At the vigil today, Arthur's maternal grandmother. Neighbours are struggling to accept what happened so close to home.
For someone to be able to do anything like that, it's just crushing.
Very sad, and nothing's been learnt from baby P and little Clemmy and Peter.
Arthur's name is added to the list of children whose deaths have caused shock and outrage. The hope that lessons learned may save others. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
At least 14 people have died and dozens more have been injured after a volcano erupted on the Indonesian island of Java. Heavy rainfall caused parts of Mount Semeru to collapse and then to erupt, sending clouds of volcanic ash into the air and burying some houses and vehicles. Rescuers are working to find and move people who've been stranded or trapped by the disaster. A new strategy to tackle drug addiction in England and Wales will see more offenders placed in rehab programmes. There will also be measures to target drug gangs. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford has the story. He's with me now. What can we say about this strategy, Daniel?
Well, Hugh, this is another attempt to tackle one of those really hard-to-fix issues faced by government. The drug strategy published tomorrow has a 10-year timeline, so no one sees any clear sign of successes this side of an election. And in truth, there aren't many successes anywhere in the world that you can point to and copy. It's not easy. This is a drug strategy for England and Wales. It's devolved in Northern Ireland and Scotland, and of course in Scotland, the death rate from drugs misuse is one of the highest anywhere in the world. At the heart of the strategy will be an attempt to get the 300,000 or so people addicted to heroin and crack cocaine into treatment in an attempt to improve their lives, and also an attempt to reduce the very high levels of shoplifting, burglary and robbery that they're thought to be responsible for. And the government sees this as part of its levelling up programme because, of course, many of the most deprived areas of England and Wales also have the highest levels of drug-related crime. There will, of course, be another push to try and deal with so-called county lines gangs, which take drugs into smaller towns and bring with them urban-style violence and exploitation of vulnerable people. And in his interview with The Sun on Sunday today, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, talked about the need to tackle the demand for drugs, particularly the demand from so-called lifestyle users of drugs, people who take drugs at weekends, in nightclubs, parties and dinner parties. Among the other things that he floated was taking away their passports and their driving licences, which of course would deal with other parts of their lifestyle.
Daniel, many thanks for the details there. Daniel Sanford, our Home Affairs correspondent there. Pope Francis has criticised what he's described as the narrow self-interest of European countries and denounced those who use migrants for political propaganda. The Pope was speaking on a visit to a refugee camp on the Greek island of Lesbos, where he warned that the treatment of migrants in the Mediterranean could lead to what he called the shipwreck of civilization. From Lesbos, our special correspondent Fergal Keane sent this report.
I love you! Papa, I love you!
They embrace the man and the message, because at this moment he is their most passionate advocate.
Pope Francis arrives at a time of renewed political crisis in Europe over the issue of migration. Since his last visit, fences have gone up, there have been pushbacks of migrants on land and at sea, and globally there's no coherent political vision to tackle the problems of poverty and war that are driving people from their homes in their thousands.
The Pope spoke to an audience largely made up of refugees, but aimed his frustration at political leaders.
Let's
stop ignoring reality. Stop constantly shifting responsibility. Stop passing off the issue of migration to others as if it mattered to no one and was only a pointless burden to be shouldered by somebody else.
It was not time to build walls, he said, or let the sea become a cemetery for children.
Let us not hastily turn away from the shocking pictures of their tiny bodies lying lifeless on the beaches.
The Pope was addressing the legacy of migrant lives lost on the journey to Europe. 87-year-old Nehbak Nazari from Afghanistan died on Lesbos. And others here, names unknown, some victims of drowning. There's sympathy on Lesbos for the dead, and many here helped when refugees first landed. But this farmer and local politician is critical of Pope Francis.
He promised many things for our island, none of which happened. This island has suffered greatly from migration. Tourism was hit hard. He should have helped and advocated for tourists to visit this island.
The Pope did refer to the struggles faced by local people on the EU's borders. But it was here, among the thousands waiting to enter Europe, that his words had most force.
I have no money, I have a very problem, no passport. Where are you going? Me.
What do you want?
I just want to be free, I just want to be freedom. I don't want anything, just freedom.
There's unlikely to be a radical political shift on migration, but the Pope has offered a robust defence of refugees in a debate so often framed in fearful terms. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Lesbos.
Bob Dole, one of the most prominent US politicians of the past half-century, has died at the age of 98. Mr. Dole overcame severe injuries in the Second World War, went on to lead the Republicans in the US Senate. He was 73 when he stood unsuccessfully for the presidency against Bill Clinton. Earlier this year, it was announced that he was being treated for lung cancer. Thousands of homes are still without power for a second weekend in the wake of Storm Arwen, which swept across parts of the UK and tore down electricity lines. Homes in parts of northern England are still waiting to be reconnected to their supplies. Our correspondent Peter Harris reports from Northumberland.
He fetched them up.
In the nick of time, the pub has its power back. Last night, a heavy snowfall left villagers snowed in, but at least they're now warm after a week-long ordeal.
It's very eventful, long, but I said, like, yesterday there was a few of us in the pub and I said, I feel like we all just live together now because we've just spent that much time together in this pub.
Throughout the power cuts, the pub at Ridsdale in Northumberland had been a refuge to huddle together. The last emergency food drops were arriving today, but being reconnected is a relief.
Beautiful, I could get a shower last night, which we haven't been able to. And then, of course, they had the food on, so we came over and the snow just came suddenly down and that was it.
Nightmare, total nightmare. If it wasn't for here, like coming over here and that, it would be totally.
Not everyone is so lucky. Across northern England, thousands are still without power after 9 days.
No central heating, no hot water, no showers, nothing. So it's grim for us, but I'm more worried about the elderly people.
In parts of rural Northumberland, there are freezing temperatures, but there was a more upbeat progress report from Northern Power Grid today. They hope to restore power to all homes across the northeast of England by Tuesday.
We haven't seen damage like this.
There are still questions about the delays in reconnecting power supplies. Today, the Business Secretary was visiting County Durham.
Completely accept that this is totally unacceptable. It's wrong. I've spoken very directly to the Northern Power Grid company, and we're going to have a review. We're going to make sure that if they have failed to invest in infrastructure, there could well be enforcement action.
As work goes on to get power back after Storm Arwen, the Met Office has now issued a new weather warning. Storm Barra is due to hit northern England and Scotland on Tuesday. Peter Harris, BBC News, Northumberland.
Right, it's time to catch up with all of the day's sports news. So let's join Kathy. Hi, Kathy.
Hello, thank you very much. It has been one of the most intriguing seasons in Formula One's history, and it will all come down to the final race next weekend. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen are now level on points after Hamilton won today's chaotic and controversial Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Adam Ward reports.
Just 2 races left and still 2 drivers could become world champion. The battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen now, a rivalry for the ages. But here there was danger around every corner. This was Mick Schumacher's race coming to an abrupt ending. A crash heavy enough to impact everyone. The aftermath cost Hamilton the lead once they'd returned to the grid. This time Verstappen was out front, but the restart was chaotic. It lasted less than a lap before they re-stopped. Another pause to raise the tension. With Verstappen back in front, the pair almost touched here. Seconds later, they definitely did. An incident that cost Verstappen the lead, a penalty, and ultimately the race. Hamilton's victory in the craziest of circumstances.
Level pegging in the championship.
The decision to race in Saudi Arabia raises ethical questions. This extraordinary season now goes to the final Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi, and the amazing rivalry will get the climax it deserves. Adam Wilde, BBC News.
Chelsea beat Arsenal 3-0 to win the Women's FA Cup and claim a domestic treble of trophies for the first time. The final was played exactly 100 years after the FA banned women from playing football, a ban that lasted for nearly 50 years. Joe Curry reports from Wembley.
Marking their moments in history. The captains of the first ever Women's FA Cup final, which took place 50 years ago, looked on at how far the game has come before today's two London rivals walked out to a crowd of almost 41,000. The game sprung into action in the 3rd minute, Fran Kirby finding herself in on goal and holding her nerve. She slotted away to give her side the lead, and Chelsea never really looked back. Arsenal struggled to recover and weren't helped when this penalty appeal was waved away. After the break, it was the Sam Kerr show, an audacious shot through the legs of Lotte Wibben-Moy. Not the best moment for Arsenal's keeper either. And then for the showstopper, with the coolest of finishes, lobbing Zinsberger to seal the cup in a player of the match performance. Chelsea worthy winners, Arsenal failing to get a single shot on target. So 3 is the magic number for Chelsea. 3 goals on the day. That's their 3rd FA Cup title. And finally, last season's domestic treble is complete, and all in front of the fans. Joe Curry, BBC News, Wembley Stadium.
And all of the day's other football results are on the BBC Sport website. Huw.
Kathy, thanks very much. And there's more coming up on the BBC News channel with Martin Croxall. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a good night.